There are approximately 14 million Jewish people in the world today, and of those 14 million, 5.5 currently live in Israel, 6 million in the US, and half a million each in the UK, France, South America, and former Soviet Union, and about 100,000 live in Australia. The Jewish culture is defined as a combination of religion, language, and history, among other. There are different variant forms of Judaism, including progressive, Orthodox, and conservative. And of these, conservative is the most newly developed. As far as our presentation, we will cover just the overall realm of Jewish culture. As far as economics go, the Jewish population that immigrated to America had greater opportunities for work, and a lot of these included jobs in the textile and needle industry. And while they did open up their own industries, none of these were on a large scale that you see in America today. And in Russia, many of the Jewish people work in agriculture and cattle raising, the metal industry, textile industry, and building industry. And overall, in the different countries, they hold a wide variety of jobs. Jewish people are among the most strongly liberal democratic group in U.S. politics today, and about 70% lean towards this direction, while about 22% of the Jewish population lean towards the Republican Party and describe themselves as conservative. For education, up until the 18th century, Jews educated their own children in their own industries and had little communication with non-Jews. And reforms during the 18th century permitted Jewish children to enter the government schools and establish secular schools of their own. And this also permitted the Jewish people could start attending higher education institutions. And there were a lot of Jewish contributors into the realm of education, and one of these was Joseph Ritter von Wertheimer, and he developed Austrian kindergarten, which eventually spread and opened up kindergartens in many other countries. The Jewish culture does have festivals in which they eat specific foods as a symbol of religious and historic significance, and this includes Passover. They also have the kashrut, which is a Jewish dietary law, and this basically ensures that all food is pure when they eat it. The animals are slain in a humane fashion and blood is removed. That fruits and vegetables are tithed by their producer, and that 1/10 goes to the poor, and that foods that harbor disease have to be perfectly fresh or they are forbidden to be eaten. Until recent decades, men remained the central figures for the Jewish population. There were a few women that were highly respected that did have minor roles in their society. In traditional Jewish culture, women played a more domestic and secondary public role. And in the Western world, acceptance of feminist ideology pushed women into a more public functional role. And now, the last couple decades, these roles for women have drastically changed, and this is most likely due to the rise of feminism and feminist consciousness. And there's also been an increase in women's roles in literature, writing, and in the music industry. As for children, their ethnic identification begins in childhood and is well underway before their teen years. And they consider this time period crucial for their formation of stabilization and their ethnic identity, and it must be attenuated by the adult experience as well. And the greatest influencer they found of this identification in adolescence is within the family, church, peers, and religious schooling. Marriage in the Jewish culture is created between a bride and a groom following the traditional ceremony by Jewish law, and divorce is permitted as long as there is mutual consent. There are different views on abnormal lifestyles such as single parenting, sexual orientation, and childless marriages. And it was said that 82% of Jewish people accept homosexuality and say society should accept it as well.
There's a delicate balance between patient autonomy and their rabbinic authority. Patients may want to find a care plan that matches both their deep religious beliefs and their high value on health. Their rabbi may be consulted or brought to patient counseling so that they may give their observations on a subject. Jewish culture is known for their desire to honor tradition, but there has been a conflict recently between those that are more religious, the Orthodox Jews, and the Haskalah, or more secular Jewish groups. Jews have been well assimilated into American culture and have seen significant success recently and are now trying to find their own places in their own religion. Jewish culture has a highly patriarchal community. The Jewish laws are geared more towards men, as the women are assumed to be at home caring for the housework, dietary regimen, and children. Men have had access to the authoritative text since their beginning and have since continued with their authoritative role. One interesting fact I learned about is the mikveh. It's a holy pool in which women are required to bathe after menstruation to make them pure after their time of menses. Jews are well known for circumcision of male neonates. This is a covenantal sign. Orthodox Jews oppose the use of birth control as they are commanded to be fruitful and multiply in their religious text, and this does not do that. The Ashkenazi Jews are well known for having genetic abnormalities causing life-threatening disorders. Jewish law permits conditional abortion if these abnormalities are found, but other abortion is not permitted. Jews also feel very strongly to preserve life and are not in favor of DNR orders. It's also important to keep Jewish holidays and meals in mind, as these may affect blood sugar control. The typical appearance of a Jew is of the, quote, Jewish nose, short stature, short arms, smaller chest circumference, and flat feet. Some genes that have been found among the Jewish population are the Cohen gene, seen in the Priestley class, and the J1 and RLA haplotypes. Many diseases have been found as more common in the Ashkenazi Jews. ACOG recommends genetic testing for Tay-Sachs disease, Canavan disease, cystic fibrosis, and familial dysautonomia. Amniocentesis is not recommended, but genetic testing in childbearing age is recommended by rabbis to see if a potential marriage would be fruitful. The BRCA1 and 2 genes have also been seen causing high risk for breast cancer, and factor 11 deficiency has been seen in many types of Jews, including Sephardic and Iraqi Jews. Ashkenazi Jews may have warfarin resistance from variances in CYP2C9 and vitamin K epoxide reductase. They also have CYP2C19 variances changing metabolism of many drug classes. Other Jewish groups have other variants but require further testing.
For communication in Jewish culture, there's multiple languages, but the dominant language is Hebrew. Other languages, a few examples are Yiddish, Aramaic, and Ladino, and modern Hebrew is called Ivrit. The dialects have changed throughout history, but all of the Jewish languages have a Hebrew and Aramaic component, and they also use Hebrew-based orthography. And for contextual use, some Jews use traditional Hebrew only for sacred and religious purposes and use other dialects for everyday language. So the Hebrew is kind of considered holy, so they only use it when they're doing religious practices. For paralanguage in Jewish culture, the voice volume is variable and changes a lot throughout conversation. They enjoy speaking through stories, and they talk very quickly, and they change their pitch and volume a lot while they're talking. They also have a way that they talk called cooperative overlapping, in which two people talking might interrupt each other back and forth a lot, but it's not considered rude in their culture. It's just a way that they communicate. They also might abruptly change the topic in conversation, and they prefer to talk about personal things. Their tone, it's not a tonal language, so their pitch contour is not used to distinguish one word from another. In a study done by Loffer, there were 6 possible nuclear tones for intonations. And then their inflections are kind of similar to American culture or English. It falls for declarative accents, rise in non-terminal positions, and strong rise if they're like asking a question. And in this culture, they're very willing to share their thoughts and feelings, and they strongly encourage emotion. For nonverbal communication and eye contact, men do not make eye contact with women, and that is more specific to Orthodox Judaism. It might not be for every Jewish person. In gesturing, constant gesturing is normal in conversation, but they don't point and they don't extend the thumb because that is considered to be offensive. And for touch, men do not touch or hug or shake hands with women other than their wife or their daughter. Body language, there are some hand signs that are traditional and they're not frequently used, and these are more specific for religious practices, but some examples are the sign of the priestly blessing, breastfeeding, pointing at the Torah, and blessings over Shabbat candles. For spatial distancing, they do stand closer together than what North Americans are accustomed to when we're having conversations. An acceptable greetings in this culture is a friendly hello or saying shalom with a handshake. For clock time versus social time, their punctuality is relaxed, so they might not always be right on time. They place a high importance on being committed to one task at a time and doing it well, so they might, if it takes them longer to get something done the way that they want it to be done, then they will go ahead and do that instead of being on time for the next task. For their names, it's a casual culture, so it's polite to initially address people as Mr. and Mrs. followed by their last name, but after that, you'll probably just call them by their first name, and that is normal and polite. Jewish culture places high importance on taking care of their bodies, so high-risk health behaviors aren't as big of an issue. Tobacco was accepted and encouraged in the past, but that was before we knew all the negative effects that it has on the body, so now it is frowned upon. Alcohol is accepted in moderation, but not to be abused, and recreational drugs are forbidden. And STI prevention, for that, they do promote abstaining from sexual intercourse until marriage. That's part of their religious practice. For Jewish pregnancy and childbearing practices, specifically fertility practices, there's a high importance placed on reproduction in the culture, and in vitro fertilization is accepted if natural reproduction is not successful. With in vitro fertilization, the embryo is not considered a person until 40 days gestation, which is interesting to note just because that way pre-implanted embryos, that there's not as much of the ethical dilemma for them for using those for research, stem cell research and those types of things. Birth control is accepted as long as the couple intends to reproduce eventually. And then some foods that increase fertility are eggs, fish, garlic, wine, milk, cheese, and fat meat, and that's believed by their culture. And then things that decrease fertility in this culture are salt, egg, barley, sleeping on the ground, bloodletting, and crying. For views on pregnancy, they believe that life begins when the baby is halfway out of the mother. A lot of times the pregnancy is not announced until the 5th month, and that is just due to superstition. They think it's bad luck for the baby. It's common to not prepare for the child until it's born, and that's also the superstitious reasoning. The baby's name's also not revealed until the official naming after the birth, and that is partly for the religious practice and also because of the superstition. For practices related to pregnancy, they believe that a pregnancy that is endangering the health of the mother should be terminated, and that is less of an ethical dilemma for them because, like I said in the previous slide, a baby is not considered its own life until it's halfway out of the mother. And also, they prefer a female physician, but they will accept a male physician if he's known to be respectable. Practices related to birthing. When a mother is in labor, every other religious or cultural practice is set aside in order to keep her healthy. And so any other delivery method like cesarean section is accepted. This is because she's considered to be in a state of mortal danger during the birthing process and for the following 3 days. So like I said, any cultural or religious practices are put aside in order to keep her healthy. The father has no physical contact with the mother during the birthing process and does not view the birth, and that has to do with their religious views and practices, and he's not to touch her when she's bleeding or anything like that, and it's all just kind of has to do with modesty and their religious beliefs. Practices related to the postpartum period. A man and woman are to remain sexually separated 7 days after the birth of a son and 14 days after the birth of a daughter. And there's no specific reason why there's a longer amount of time after the birth of a daughter. Circumcision of males occurs on the 8th day after birth, but it is acceptable to postpone that if the baby is not healthy enough. So once a doctor says that the baby is able to undergo the procedure, they can wait 7 days. And breastfeeding is normal in this culture. And it's also important to note that mothers may not spend a lot of time with their baby in the hospital, and they're not really in a hurry to get back to the house, back home. So that's not abnormal, and it shouldn't be viewed as the mom ignoring the baby.